This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp. After experiencing trauma, I went to therapy, and my therapist guided me through a difficult time in my life. They helped me understand what was happening and provided me with tools to cope and find my own strength and resilience. Their experience and compassion were invaluable and enabled me to rebuild my life and move forward. I strongly believe in the power of therapy to help people through difficult times. BetterHelp connects you with a licensed therapist who is trained to listen and give you helpful, unbiased advice. First, you go to their site. You can use my link, betterhelp.com/resilience. You answer a few questions, and BetterHelp will match you to a professional who has years of experience helping people with struggles just like yours. Let BetterHelp connect you to a therapist who can support you, all from the comfort of your own home. Visit betterhelp.com/resilience or choose podcast, then Notes on Resilience during sign up and enjoy a special discount on your first month. Hello, welcome to Notes on Resilience. I'm your host, Manya Chilinsky. My guest today is Matthew Lostaglia. He works with organizations to help leaders attract and retain critical talent. And today we talked about resilience and preventative resilience, the value of meaningful and transparent communications within an organization, and even talked about work-life harmony. We had a fabulous time in this conversation. I hope you enjoy it as much as we did. Matthew, hello. How are you today?
I am amazing, Manya. How are you?
I am also doing pretty well. Now, we're going to get into the details about who you are and why are you and I talking. But before we do that, I want to know if you could have any superpower, what would that be?
Oh, that is a great question. I have thought about this more than one probably should. And it is, I would have the power of theme music, like movie style theme music that I could hear at all times. So that way I would know if an argument that I'm having is a silly argument or a serious argument. If I knew that there was danger lurking around the corner, I would get all right. It's that's where I'm at. I want some music.
That is awesome. And I want to add that now to my ever-growing list of superpowers that I want to have. You're right, though. That theme music often is cueing us as to the emotional state of what's happening. And there are times I think we could benefit from knowing maybe a little bit more than we can sense on our own.
Right. It's like clairvoyant minus, right? It's like you don't know for sure exactly what's going on, but you know the right frame of mind to be in.
Yes. Ooh. All right. If you figure that one out, figure out how to make that happen, please let me know.
You'll be the first on the list.
All right. So thank you for sharing that. I love it. I think we're going to get a lot of comments on that one. But let's find out who you are. Tell us who you are and what you do. And how is it that you and I are in a place today to be talking about resiliency and trauma and compassion?
There's so many different ways to answer that question. I am a corn-fed and raised Nebraska boy, right? That somehow found his way currently to be working on Long Island as a small business advisor. So go figure how that happens. My path towards resilience was really spurred by my service in the Army. So
Okay.
I served for about 11 and a half, 12 years before I was medically discharged.
Okay.
And while I was in, I had the opportunity to attend a 80-hour block of instruction. It might be 40. So fellow resilience trained members out there, don't hate on me. This was many moons ago. So I went through this training and everything about it just clicked. It was like, it just made sense. It was everything from, how do you help people, give them tools to overcome when they're catastrophizing, when they're stuck on this idea and they find themselves spiraling down this negative thought process, and how to stop counterproductive thoughts from happening, how to use resilience in real time to get yourself back on track. All of these, they say that psychologists often choose that path because they were patients or because they saw the need, right?
Yes.
That was kind of the thing for me, is I saw how useful each one of these would be in their own way in my own life. And I was like, if this is at this level of profound in its transformation for me, and I did apply them in my own life and I saw the results, they've got to be great for others. And that was the whole point of the training. It was a train the trainer type of training session. And so I went back to our unit, and for our brigade, I would go around and I would conduct the trainings and the facilitations for these things. And so that carried on through multiple different units. I did it for it wasn't in the 82nd. No, I did it for CID, the Protective Services Battalion. And I did it for like an active duty and a reserve component type of unit. So I had a lot of time of getting up in front of large groups of people and doing seminar lecture style, and then actually breaking down workshops with smaller groups and breaking those into smaller teams and having them work through some of the nuanced exercises.
Wow.
It was so much fun. And it was one of the fun challenges of that is it's very resilience and mindset training is not something that soldiers and special agents and they're not predisposed to thinking that this is a good idea.
Okay.
They're very much of the mindset that this is for people who are emotionally weak and can't handle their business. And if you need this, then you have no business being on our team. And so there was a large, and depending on the group, but this is pretty consistent, that like the best version of this would be, this is great, not for me, you know?
Yes. Yeah.
And so it was a lot of one-on-ones with people outside so that I could kind of check their aggression going into it. So they wouldn't be particular disruptors. But after the absolute last resort that I would go to is, listen, if you don't believe that you need this, that's fine. Like maybe you don't, maybe you are perfectly resilient and there's not a single piece of adversity that could ever come up in your life that you wouldn't be able to overcome without batting an eye.
Right.
What about your soldiers? You're a leader, right? How can you help your soldiers to overcome these things? Everyone wants to talk about how the next generation coming up is softer than this one and they're coddled, right? And every generation thinks that about the next one. It's no different in the military. They think the next generation of soldiers coming up like, oh, they're so soft and basic training is so much easier now. Like, okay, well, let's help them. If it's easy and they're coddled and they're not ready, then let's help give them the tools. So the better that you know this and that you have your hands wrapped around it. And then it would kind of click and like, okay, let's do it.
Wow. Okay.
So that was fun. That was a fun experiment. So that spurred me in a high levels of kind of self-study on the way out. I was reading lots of books, purchasing studies because I didn't know how to get studies for free by being a student. So I would be buying studies online that were done in Australia for the cadets over there, and just like everything that I could get my hands on. I just wanted to absorb and learn. And also I could start my own practice. And so that's how I transitioned out of the military.
Wow. There's a lot in there. And I think we could spend a long time talking just about that experience, because I would say that I never imagined that the military had something like resiliency training. And that's wonderful, because I also imagine that is a group of people who could benefit greatly from knowing some of these skills, given the kinds of things that you encounter on your job as someone in the military. And what do you do now that you're out of the military?
So I just real quick on that last note, one of the things that was interesting about that resilience training while I was in was resilience really came into play. And I think where it clicked with a lot of people is that this isn't about you doing your job in the military. And this goes for all people. Maybe this isn't about your performance at work. Maybe it's about the integration of your performance at home and your performance at work, and how you bring those things together in a more seamless way. Because oftentimes the idea of work-life balance I don't necessarily believe in the balance as much as I believe in kind of harmony. Sometimes work is kind of that front lead singer, and you have harmonization from your family. And sometimes it's the other way around. And it's important to recognize when that is. And resilience training kind of helps you to deal with the different levels of adversity that are going to come up while you bounce back and forth. And so that was really helpful for soldiers. And it's really helpful for people in high stress, high tempo corporate positions now. And that leads directly into what I'm doing. So
Okay.
I started a business in April 2022, and it's called Resilient Talent Solutions.
Okay.
And the whole premise behind it was to take these resiliency skills and to present them to employers as ways that we can train their leaders to become more connected with their teams and with the employees that work there.
Oh, that's excellent.
The idea is that there are a plethora of studies that show that when employees, specifically the ones that I have, were all about sales, but this really does cross industry. When the employees are connected, they feel a sense of connection with their supervisors, they perform better. And when you think about it logically, it kind of passes that common sense, check.
Yes.
Where it's like, oh yeah, if I like the person I'm working for and I connect with them in a meaningful way, it doesn't mean you have to have the same demographic background or the same core beliefs or the same religion. It's just a point of connection where you're like, oh yeah, like we're on the same team. There's cohesion here.
Right.
And so when that's there, your performance increases. You want to be a contributing member of that team. And so that inherently increases your performance. So the way I sell it is kind of like two ways, right? And it's both benefits. I just want to create wins and wins. The real motivating backdrop for me was for the employees. Mm-hmm. It wasn't for the businesses. I got to get into the businesses to be able to help the employees, because I want people who maybe work in jobs that aren't intrinsically fulfilling or satisfying to them. And I want them to be able to find ways to get that sense of accomplishment, that sense of fulfillment, even in those positions where the work itself doesn't do it for them.
Right. And, for better or for worse, there are many positions like that, because there's a lot of things we have to do to keep the world running. So, and not all of them are glamorous and fun. Oh, that's fabulous. You have such a great experience. And I really appreciate that you are thinking about resilience as a way to help employees and leaders and employees. So I'm not sure if you and I have ever talked about this. I have a sketchy relationship with the actual word resilience. As the host of the podcast Notes on Resilience, I put the word right there up front. But sometimes I feel like it gets used, maybe not with the purest of intentions. Right. And I'm curious, with all your training and the work that you do, what do you think of the word resilience?
I 100%. I don't know if we disagree in the same flavor, but I think I also have high levels of cognitive dissonance, maybe is the right word, with the term resilience. So for me, resilience pure, if I look at just the word itself, mm-hmm. and the training that was done that I underwent in the military, it was, how do you get yourself back to performing at the standard level that's expected from whatever team you're in and whatever position you're fulfilling in the military? How do we get you back there after you've been knocked down by adversity? Right. So like something bad happens. How do we, as quickly and efficiently and thoroughly, right, not just speed, but like in a meaningful way that lasts for a significant period of time, how do we get you back there as quickly and as efficiently as possible? So to me, that's resilience. But that's why I'm not 100% on board with using resilience in what I do, because I was an intel analyst, an intelligence analyst when I was in the Army for the last 75% of my career.
Okay.
And what we always talked about, intel in the military is all about looking at the enemy, predicting what they're going to do so we could tell our guys, hey, this is the most likely scenario. This is the most dangerous scenario. We're expecting to see people over there. They're likely going to have these weapons, that whole thing.
Okay.
So what we try to do is we try to get to what we call left of the bang, right? So if the bang would be like seen as maybe an IED going off, but it's whatever bad thing is going to happen. Mm-hmm. We want to get before that. So how many steps before that in the process can we get? Can we stop the bringing of fertilizer from this location to this location, right? Can we find the person who knows actually how to make bombs, right?
Right.
Who is that? And so that's getting left. So we're not trying to figure, okay, if the bomb went off, let's figure out who was there. Let's get left. Let's get before it.
Right.
For me, with Resilient Talent Solutions, that's exactly the point. And that's why we created what I called connected leadership. And it's all almost, I guess you could say it's like preventative resilience, right? So
I love it.
So you're getting ahead of those times that are going to come up. But in the process, by following these 6 principles that I've laid out in connected leadership, you're going to prevent you're not going to prevent bad things from happening because that's not possible. Right. But what you're going to do is it's like, this is probably not a great analogy because not a lot of people are going to get it, but you may know as a podcast host, but when you're looking at audio and you're trying to close the gaps, like you're trying to take the highs and drop them down and you're trying to take the lows and bring them up. And so that way you're within a more acceptable range and it sounds better. To me, that's what connected leadership does, is that it cuts off those lows of you getting dropped down so far by adversity, and it takes it up because we're anticipating it and we're skilled and trained and ready to handle these kind of situations when they come up.
Okay. I like that thought of I also like that thought of shifting left to kind of get to it before. And, I think that way in my work a little bit differently. I sort of think the trauma has already happened, but let's shift left as close to that happening as possible to prevent the downstream effects. So yeah, I think we're sort of aligned on our thought about the concept of resiliency.
And I think that we're probably both on the same page too with what happens right of the bang, right? If we're going to stick with that analogy, is that, and maybe you can help me here. So my idea is that, and like I laid out with the definition of resilience as I saw it, is that it gets you back to your operating level that you were at before. Right. This is where the idea of Malcolm Gladwell's anti-fragility comes into play, where I think that true resilience training, or anybody that's a real practitioner, that's not actually what they're trying to do. They're trying to get you stronger than where you're at before. So that way, if that thing comes up again, or if other things that are in the same family of adversity come up, you're not, because if you're at where you're at before, you're going to hit that point again and you're going to drop down again. Right. So we want to get you stronger and more prepared, stronger emotionally, more internal mental resilience. Right. So that way, when you hit that type of adversity, you're like, oh, that's not that big of a deal. Like, I've dealt with this before. I know how to handle it. And so it's different. It's like you start at baseline, you start at 0, right? You get dropped down to -2, but then you hop up to 0.5. Right. Right. And then you just kind of keep going that way up.
Right. Interesting. Okay. So what do you think that people misunderstand the most about either trauma or resilience, which I sort of use as 2 sides of the same coin, which is not exactly true, but what do you think people misunderstand most?
I think there's a really good kind of get together that I had while I was in the military of resilience leaders, people who were training, and they were talking about like how far along the military has gotten when it comes to working with people through emotional trauma, right? We're really good at the physical side. We got all the doctors, we got all the surgeons. We'll help you immediately on the spot. We'll fly you out of a combat zone, take you to one of the best doctors in the world, and you'll be fixed, right? Yeah. Incredible. We're not there on the mental side on that trauma. So I think that that's the first thing that people misunderstand, is that, because you can't see it, then it's not as big of a deal. It's easy to recognize a broken arm, right? Everyone can see how it doesn't function anymore. You can physically tell that it's broken. Right. And so that's where it gets lost in translation, is I can't see it, and maybe I've never experienced it. And while I've never experienced a broken arm, like personally, I really haven't, I can imagine what that's like. Right. It's hard for me to imagine what it's like to be clinically depressed because I've never been there. Right. And so I think that that's kind of where it gets lost in translation. But the one thing I just wanted to drop with that conversation that I was having with those individuals was, oh, it's so good that we have all of these services. I even brought up, I was challenged on this because I was like, oh, look how much progress we've had. And I said, we have these organizations like Military One Source that active duty service members can reach out to and say, I need counseling. or I need marriage counseling or whatever. Like you can get it and you can get it for free. And what I said was a benefit was that, and you can get it without your chain of command having to be notified.
Yes.
And I was like, that's a huge benefit because then I don't have to worry about implications on my career. And that's where I was challenged and said, we haven't made that much progress because real progress is when you go to your chain of command first because you have confidence that your career is not going to be put in jeopardy because of these things. Your career is not in jeopardy because you broke your arm. But it's not a one-to-one analogy, I acknowledge, because we deal with weapons. We deal with people's lives and depending on each other to fight in wars. And so if somebody isn't emotionally there, it's hard to tell. Again, you can't see a depressed brain.
Right. And that's different than if your workplace is the front office of a manufacturing company, or it's different if you are actually on the factory floor. I mean, there's all these different implications, but fewer of them are life and death, perhaps, or as serious as somebody in the military who's deployed and actually on the front lines. So kind of bringing up the organization, like what do you think is the role of our systems or organizations, which could be something like a workplace, in helping people heal from trauma and in supporting their resiliency?
I think it all comes down to what are organizations other than groups of people trying to accomplish something, right? And so if I am in a group of people and we're trying to accomplish something, it's within my best interest. One, there's a lot of depth to this. So it's within my best. If we rewind, right, if we're getting left of the bang, right, it's in my best interest if I'm recruiting people to get people who are highly motivated and highly skilled to get this thing accomplished, to make my vision become a reality. And so by doing so, I'm creating alignment already in between. I'm creating connection, right, between me and the people that I'm bringing in. So it's not just I'm hiring employees. I'm creating a team,
right? And
having a team is different than having employees. You see them different. You care for them. Like, you can relate this to sports. If you're the quarterback and one of your linemen is gotten sick, or they're showing up to practice and they're not performing, they're just like, man, what's going on? You're acting sluggish. Like, did you not get sleep, or like out partying too late? Like, what happened? That type of conversation like that, in that casual, I genuinely care. That's what I believe is missing in most organizations, is that there's a disconnect. There's a personal disconnect. And I think where a lot of people get lost when I'm trying to talk to them about connected leadership in the workplace and building trust and belonging is they think that I'm trying to promote like friendship, like you need to be friends.
Yeah.
That's not true. You can have a genuine, meaningful, deep relationship with somebody and not be personal, intimate friends.
Yes. And I've talked to people about the idea of having compassion in the workplace. And that doesn't mean you have to be nice. You have to be don't be mean, but it's not the same thing. And you don't have to be best friends with everybody. You just have to be a little more understanding of, sort of be able to put yourself in their shoes and understand. So at risk of sending us down a very difficult to navigate path, what do you think is it about the way, let's just take companies as organizations right now, because I know you and I work with people in the workplace. What do you think it is about the way companies are organized that makes it so difficult to make those human connections and think about the people that we're working with as actual humans who have messy lives?
Such a great question. It is, some of it's structural design. And when we think about structural design, it comes down to what are the incentives? I was just talking with my wife about this when it comes to spending in the military, because she's still in. And I was like, man, wouldn't it be great if there was an incentive for commanders, the people who are responsible for budgets for each of their units, had an incentive to save money? Because right now, the way that it's structured is that they have incentives. They get a certain budget. Say they get $2 million for this year for all the training. And if they spend 1.5, guess what they're getting next year?
Yes.
1.5.
Yes.
Right. And so the incentive, and you'll see this. So people will save, commanders will be frugal with their budget until Q4. Q4 hits and we're like, everyone's getting new desks. Everyone's getting new monitors, right? Like, and it's like, we have to spend it because we might need it next year for a different type of training program. Like there might be more opportunities that we don't know about right now. So we have to have that budget available.
Right.
And so they're penalized by being frugal. Right now, there's no benefit to an individual leader, to a manager, to a CEO for connecting with their employees. There's no immediate, tangible, or monetary, I should say that, benefit to this. The benefit is you have an increased rate of retention. Right. That's not something that you can feel right away. And it's something that as soon as somebody quits, even if you've gone through all of the 6 principles of connected leadership that I think are going to be your strongest guarantee to make sure that you hold on to your people as long as possible. But I don't tell the people that are the businesses that bring this on, I don't tell them this is a guarantee to keep your people. I say, what it does is it's a guarantee that you are going to open the lines of communication with the people and that you're going to know when they're leaving far before, sometimes they even know, but far before they actually leave. Like the amounts of people just not showing up, the amounts of people saying, hey, I'm putting in my 2 weeks and you had no idea.
Right.
Like we can leave that as a thing of the past when we open those lines of communication. And I mean, like you said, when you have compassion for people and when you realize this isn't their end all be all dream job. Like maybe being on the sales floor for your organization isn't everything they hope they'd be. Maybe they thought they were going to be a ballerina dancer. Maybe they thought they were going to perform on Broadway. That's good. It's good that you know that and think about how you can support them to get there. Right. Because when you do this, you turn employees into ambassadors, even after they leave. Think about somebody that went professional and became extremely famous and they're like, tell us about your story. Give us an interview, a biography about your life. They're either going to mention you kindly, they're going to mention you poorly, or they're not going to mention you at all. And there's only one of those options that's good for you.
Right. Well, there's that saying, people aren't necessarily going to remember what you say to them, but they're going to remember how you made them feel. And, I imagine it's hard for managers and executives in organizations to deal with the fact that you can't necessarily draw a straight line between, just for an example, resiliency training or becoming trauma sensitive and then the bottom line. But as you said, it might reduce turnover, it might increase productivity, reduce presenteeism or absenteeism, all of those things. But I feel like these days, companies in particular have a hard time if you can't show that just straight line between A and B, we're not sure we're going to invest in it.
You're 100% correct. That is a huge reservation for almost every single, that's really what the conversation always comes down to whenever we're working with an organization is what's the ROI? When am I going to see it? Like if I'm going to invest this much into this, and part of what some of the ways that I've seen are effective, I guess, ways to manage those objections are to talk about the cost of what it takes to bring on a new employee, right? So if we look at what it costs for somebody to quit, to bring somebody on, to train them and have them onboarded on average, it depends on what region of the country you're in and this, that, and the other, but we're looking depends on how much they're getting paid. So it's between like $7,000 and $15,000 can be the cost of just acquiring the person. And oftentimes that's before training. So just, like I said, it just depends. And so then you have to spend the time of getting them trained. And you think about the amount of revenue you're not producing while this person gets up to speed. Right. And so if the cost of training is less than what it costs to go through that cycle with one person, then you can kind of look at that ROI. Like, okay, if this training is $15,000 that's the cost of one turnover. So if
Right.
if we're pushing 75% of turnovers down the road 2 years, the ROI is made up like immediately, or for the cost, the investment into the training. Even with that, it's still, that's a longer and more abstract,
Yes.
return than, okay, I get this, and now my employees perform. Are you guaranteeing me that my employees are going to produce 15% more month over month?
Right. Right. I'm glad you used the word abstract, because I think it is something that can be recognized if you look for it, but I think it can be easy to miss. What do you think is the most important action or policy that an organization, company, something can take to be really supportive of resiliency?
I think it's probably the number one way that you can promote resiliency in your organization is to not just have an open door policy, but the open door policy it's like on the menu, So it's really looking at, how do we inject purposeful and meaningful communication within the workplace or within your organization? And what does that look like? So if a company wants to do this, it doesn't have to be me, it doesn't have to be you, but it's really smart to bring in a third party that's not in the box of the organization, that can come in and assess the type of communication that's happening right now, because you're going to get biased. If you do an internal survey and you say, oh, we're curious about how you guys feel about our current level of communication, it's very rare that you're going to get fully transparent, straight answers.
Right.
And if you don't, or if you're concerned about that, oftentimes it's because you're not giving that to them. If you're so that's part of the communication training. So the surveys and finding the information is one thing on the front end. But when we're looking at communication, it's all about being continuous or frequent, not embracing meaningful conversations in an inconsistent pattern. Because to build trust, one of the first things you have to do, one of the things you have to do permanently, is be consistent. Think about the way that you trust anybody. It's because I can trust you because you always show up at this time. Because when I need you, you're always there.
Right.
So you have to be consistent, and then you have to communicate with transparency and with vulnerability. And so if you were just going to do one thing, it would be transform the way that your leaders communicate with your people at work. And that in and of itself, that is going to change the entire dynamic. It's going to change the way that the people, your employees, view themselves in your workplace. They're going to feel more valued. When they feel more valued and they feel like, I'm being communicated with honestly by the leadership, I can communicate honestly with that leadership.
Right. Oh, nobody on the podcast can see, but I just nodding my head furiously every time you said one of these things. Like, yes. Oh, Matthew, thank you. I so appreciate your perspective on this topic, and especially given the way that you learned resiliency and the training that you had. Now, what's one question that you wish I'd asked you, and how would you have answered that question?
Oh gosh. Look at you with your freaking all-star questions to start the show off and end the show. Oh, one question. I guess, what is, oh man, maybe how I have implemented resilience in my own life. How have I lived these principles that I'm saying out?
Okay.
This is a great tool, by the way, that you're using right now, that I'm going to steal, by the
way. Please have it. Take it. Run with abandon.
I like it. And I will promise I will cite you at least for the first 7 times that I use it. But and there's a plethora. Of course, I set myself up for a terrible question because there's so many answers to it.
Sure.
But I think for me, one of the ways that I promote my own resilience and that I manage to get myself back through adversity is I allow myself to get into my head about whatever the situation is for a very short period of time. And so if I'm reeling from a fight with my wife, I'll leave and I'll literally on my watch, I'll set a timer for 15 minutes.
Okay.
And I say, you have 15 minutes to be a baby about this.
Okay.
So after that 15-minute timer goes off, then it goes into not necessarily problem solving mode, but into relationship focus mode.
Yes.
Because one of the problems that I see with couples that fight is that the purpose of the fight, the purpose of the argument is about who's right.
Yes.
And it's not about relationship first. It's
Right.
not like, it doesn't matter to me if a million people showed up and said, Matthew was right. Sorry, Matthew's wife.
Yeah.
He's right. It doesn't matter if that's the case. It matters how and why she came to that perspective. And so when I'm able to do that, so when the 15-minute timer goes off, then it's a cue for me. It's turned into this mental cue for me to say, okay, I want to start asking questions in my head that I want to ask her. And I kind of run through those as like a game where I'm like, okay, well, I wonder what made her think about that. And oftentimes by asking these questions, if I pretend like I'm actually asking her this question, I answer it. And it's not even like I'm presuming what she's going to say and putting this negative spin on it. It's like, oh, well, of course she thought that way, because in this, I just walked into the house through the front door for the first time ever after walking my dogs at 5:30 in the morning. And she came around the corner with a coffee mug, getting ready to throw it at my face. Oh, and she was very upset about the fact. And I was like, you almost killed me. Don't be upset with me. But after processing that, I was like, well, of course, I've never come in through the front door. I always come in through the back door, through the garage. And so, of course, she expected, and this is obvious. This is a very simplified version of something that could happen, but this really did just happen yesterday. So, and so that was, of course, like, why would she have done that? And it's like that answer is obvious. Sometimes the answers are less obvious. You have to ask some more questions. And sometimes you're not going to re-enter the conversation with the answers, and that's okay. But it's about re-entering the conversation with that perspective of curiosity, of like, I love you and I want to know more about you.
Right. I love that concept of taking a break and letting yourself have the emotions, whatever has come up during, whether it's an argument or something else. I've just recently had a sort of difficult experience with a colleague, and that's the kind of thing that would benefit from, let me just take a little bit of time and deal, just have the emotions and then call it done. And now let's switch modes and work on how do we resolve this.
Yeah, because then you're giving space to the emotion, and you're not invalidating it. You're saying like, yeah, you're upset, be upset, but you only have a limit because it's not productive after.
Right. That I can say that is one thing I have learned in my resiliency journey is our emotions are telling us something. They're telling us something important about our state. And I need to listen, but then there's a point after which, okay, now it's time I've listened. Now I need to move on and take some steps, whatever those steps may be.
That's brilliant. That is well said. Our emotions are trying to, and they absolutely are. If you know the cues, if you know what they're trying to say, like if you get familiar with that kind of thought process, your perspective on yourself, it transforms. That's beautiful.
Well, thank you. Why you and I should talk much more often, Matthew. But we are getting towards the end of our time. And before we tell listeners how they can reach you, I would love to know, what would you tell your 18-year-old self about resiliency or compassion?
That I would actually listen to?
Yes, I'm not sure our 18-year-old selves would ever listen to this advice, but what would you try to tell your 18-year-old self?
18. Oh, man, that was a real bad time in my life. But a lot of poor decisions were being made, and not the typical, like some real character defining things were going on in my life. And I was making the wrong choices. Okay. And so I think the best advice that I could give myself is probably the same perspective that ended up having me shift from the way that I was thinking to lead me to be able to become the person that I am now. Okay. And that is ask, it's doing the exact opposite of your question. Okay. And I do this to myself now. So I'll say, what would the Matthew that owns a multinational organization that has helped 10 million people become more resilient and find more meaning and satisfaction from unmeaningful work, what decision would he make?
Oh,
right. And so leveraging that version of like really envisioning like what your life would be, like spending some time in that, like 2 minutes, really envisioning what that version of you looks like that you want to have. And then it kind of puts you, again, reframing that mental space to be there, and then to ask, like, okay. And because to me, we know the answers to probably 80-90% of our questions. We know it. We know what the answer is. It's just we don't want to admit it. And so sometimes that's why therapy is really good, because they help get you to a place where you can answer that question for yourself. And so this is essentially like, this is just a tool to help you answer it for yourself by leaning on yourself.
Right.
And so that's what I would tell the 18-year-old version of me is like, hey, look forward and ask me. Like, if I told the 18-year-old version of myself that I would have flown with the Secretary of Defense overseas to protect him on security missions with his Secret Service equivalent, and I would have been jumping out of airplanes and leading military organizations while they conduct airborne operations, and that I would be starting multiple businesses, I would have laughed in my own face.
Yeah.
So I would say, imagine what that looks like. And then let's make some choices. Let's figure out what we're doing today, and not the grind and hustle stuff, but like, what type of person are we? What type of person do I need to be that person? And that, to me, I think that would be the biggest difference maker.
Wow. That is fabulous. I like that concept of looking forward and asking, what would me 10 years from now, 10 days from now, think about this decision or this action. All right. Well, Matthew, oh my gosh, this was such a fabulous conversation. Thank you so much for your time today. And how can our listeners reach you?
100% LinkedIn. That is where I'm putting all of my focus. Don't even go to my website. Don't go to Facebook. Don't go anywhere else. Go straight to LinkedIn. My last name is very unique. I think there's only one Matthew Lostaglia. Actually, we just found the second Matthew Lostaglia in the world, and he is a physicist of some kind. So we're pretty much the same thing.
Yes, absolutely.
But he's in Italy, and I don't think he speaks English. So I should be the only Matthew Lostaglia that exists.
All right. Well, and we will put a link in the show notes. So to make it easier for you to find this particular Matthew Lostaglia. Matthew, again, thank you so much for this conversation. And to our listeners, I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did.
Thank you, Manya.
Thank you for listening. I hope you got as much out of this conversation as I did. So if you'd like to learn more about me, Manya Chilinsky, I work with organizations to help understand how to create environments where people can thrive after difficult life experiences. And I do this through talks and consulting. I'm a survivor of mass violence, and I use my experience to help leaders learn about resiliency, compassion, and trauma-sensitive leadership, to build strategies to enable teams to thrive and be engaged amidst difficulty and turmoil. If this is something you want to learn more about, visit my website, www.manyachilinsky.com, or email me at manya@manyachilinsky, or stop by my social media on LinkedIn and Twitter. Thanks so much.